a small, secluded town where time seemed to have forgotten its existence, stood a lonely antique shop, far end of a rarely traveled street. The shop, with its weathered sign barely hanging on to its last breath, had recently reopened after years of being closed off from the world. It was a place filled with curiosities, each item seemingly holding a story waiting to be told. Nadine, curious 10-year-old girl with a fascination for dolls, lived in a creaky old house on the outskirts of this town. She spent her days playing in her room, surrounded by her collection of porcelain, cloth, and wooden dolls, each with a different expression and charm. Nadine's parents, who worked long hours in the city, left her in the care of her elderly grandmother, who often dozed off in front of the television, leaving Nadine to her own devices. One afternoon, as Nadine wandered through the town with the little money she had saved, she stumbled upon the antique shop. The door creaked open as she entered, revealing a dusty world of forgotten relics. Her eyes widened as she explored, touching the smooth surfaces of old vases, the intricate carvings on wooden furniture, and the delicate lace of vintage dresses. In the far corner of the shop, hidden behind a stack of old books and a broken mirror, Nadine spotted a small wooden doll. It was unlike any other doll she had ever seen. The doll had a peculiar face, with glass eyes that seemed almost too lifelike. Its expression was frozen in a mix of sadness and longing, and its clothes were tattered and faded. Something about the doll drew Nadine in, as if it were calling to her. She carefully picked up the doll and brought it to the counter. The shopkeeper, an old man with a mysterious air about him, looked at the doll with a strange glint in his eye. "That one's been here a long time," he said in a voice that sent a shiver down Nadine's spine. "Are you sure you want it?" Nadine nodded, not able to explain the pull she felt toward the doll. She paid for it and quickly left the shop, cradling the doll in her arms. From the moment Nadine brought the doll home, strange things began to happen. At first, it was little things, like finding the doll in a different spot than where she had left it, or feeling like its glassy eyes were following her every move. But soon, the occurrences became more unsettling. One night, as Nadine lay in bed, she thought she heard faint footsteps in the hallway. She pulled the covers up to her chin and listened. The sound grew closer until it stopped right outside her bedroom door. Nadine held her breath, waiting for what felt like an eternity, but the door never opened. The next morning, she found the doll sitting on the floor by the door, its head tilted slightly to the side as if it were listening. Nadine's heart pounded in her chest. She could have sworn she had left the doll on her dresser the night before. As the days passed, Nadine began to have nightmares. Each night, the same dream played out in her mind. She would find herself in a dark, unfamiliar room, with the wooden doll standing in the center. In the dream, the doll's eyes would come to life, and it would start to whisper to her, though she could never make out the words. The whispers would grow louder and louder until they became deafening, and Nadine would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. During the day, Nadine's fear of the doll grew, but so did her curiosity. She couldn't bring herself to get rid of it, no matter how much it frightened her. It was as if the doll had some kind of hold on her. Desperate to understand what was happening, Nadine decided to investigate the doll's origin. She knew she couldn't do it alone, so she confided in her best friend Kevin. Kevin was a year older than Nadine and loved mystery. Eagerly agreed to help. The two friends started by visiting the antique shop again, but when they arrived, they found the door locked and the windows covered in dust. It was as if the shop had never been open. Confused but undeterred, they decided to search for information about the doll in the town library. After hours of digging through old records and newspapers, they stumbled upon a story that sent chills down their spine. Many years ago, a young girl named Clara had gone missing from the town under mysterious circumstances. Clara had been an only child, known for her love of dolls. Her parents, devastated by her disappearance, had searched for her relentlessly, but had never found any trace of her. The last clue they had was a diary entry from Clara's mother, who had written about a strange wooden doll that Clara had become obsessed with in the days leading up to her disappearance. The description of the doll matched the one Nadine had found perfect. Their search led them to a deeper, darker secret. Kevin discovered an old, dusty book hidden deep within the library's archive. A book filled with tales of ancient curses and forbidden ritual. One of the stories detailed a curse that could trap a person's soul within an object, such as a doll, if certain conditions were met. The cursed soul would remain imprisoned until another person willingly took their place. Nadine's heart sank as she realized the implication. The doll she had brought home was not just any doll. It was Clara's prison, and now the doll wanted her to take Clara's place. Nadine and Kevin knew they had to act fast. The doll's behavior was becoming more erratic. It no longer stayed still. It would move on its own, sometimes even appearing in different rooms of the house. Nadine would find it sitting at the kitchen table or lying in her bed as if it were waiting for her. One night, Nadine was awoken by the feeling of something cold touching her face. She opened her eyes to find the doll standing on her pillow, its glassy eyes inches from her own. This time, the doll didn't just whisper, it spoke clearly, voice a soft, eerie echo. "Help me," pleaded. "Free me." Terrified, Nadine pushed the doll away and ran to Kevin's house, unable to stay in the same room with it any longer. Together, they decided they had no choice but to confront the curse head-on. But how could they free Clara without Nadine sacrificing herself? Kevin, ever resourceful, suggested they perform a ritual from the ancient book they had found. A ritual that might break the curse without requiring a soul to be exchanged. The ritual was dangerous and required them to invoke powers they barely understood, but it was their only hope. That night, under the pale light of the full moon, Nadine and Kevin gathered the items needed for the ritual: a circle of salt, candles, and the book that held the incantation. Nadine brought the doll to the center of the circle, her hands trembling as she placed it on the ground. As Kevin began to recite the ancient words, the air around them grew thick with tension. The wind picked up, swirling leaves and dust into the circle. The doll's glass eyes began to glow with an unnatural light, and Nadine could feel a presence, Clara's presence, growing stronger. The ground beneath them trembled as Kevin's voice grew louder, calling upon forces that had lain dormant for centuries. The doll began to twitch and jerk, as if something inside it was struggling to break free. Suddenly, the doll let out a piercing scream, a sound so horrifying that Nadine covered her ears in a desperate attempt to block it out. The scream echoed through the night, reverberating off the trees and houses. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the scream stopped. The doll went limp and the glow in its eyes faded. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a soft, ethereal light rose from the doll and took the shape of a young girl. Clara's spirit, finally free from her wooden prison, smiled at Nadine and Kevin. Her lips moved, no sound came out. Yet, they both understood the message. "Thank you." Clara's spirit slowly dissolved into the night, leaving behind only the broken doll. Nadine and Kevin stood in silence, the weight of what they had just experienced settling in. They had done it. They had freed Clara without sacrificing Nadine's soul. The doll, now nothing more than a lifeless piece of wood, was a mere shadow of the terror it had once been. They decided to bury the doll deep in the woods, far away from anyone who might stumble upon it. As they covered it with earth, Nadine whispered a final goodbye to Clara, hoping that her soul had finally found peace. With the ritual complete and the doll buried, life slowly returned to normal for Nadine. The nightmares ceased, and the strange occurrences in her house stopped. But the experience had left a permanent mark on her. She no longer felt the same joy in collecting dolls as she once had, and her collection began to gather dust. Nadine and Kevin stood in silence, the weight of what they had just experienced settling in. They had done it. They had freed Clara without sacrificing Nadine's soul. The doll, now nothing more than a lifeless piece of wood, was a mere shadow of the terror it had once been. They decided to bury the doll deep in the woods, far away from anyone who might stumble upon it. As they covered it with earth, Nadine whispered a final goodbye to Clara, hoping that her soul had finally found peace. With the ritual complete and the doll buried, life slowly returned to normal for Nadine. The nightmares ceased, and the strange occurrences in her house stopped. But the experience had left a permanent mark on her. She no longer felt the same joy in collecting dolls as she once had, and her collection began to gather dust.